We're live.
We're live.
Mm.
Welcome to TTSN, the Transformational Squirrel Network, where we make shift happen. I want to welcome you all here today. We are so excited to have Edward Fitzgerald here with us from the UK. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, his time, and he has thankfully decided to join us. We're so blessed that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to do so. We are really thrilled to be here today with you to talk about your traumatic brain injury, how you healed that, to talk about the Dreamer movie, and to talk about the 7 dimensions to creating a better world for all. But before we get into those specific things, Edward, I would like to ask you to, first of all, to welcome you to our program, and then to ask you, great, to ask you to tell us a little bit about your backstory. Tell us what got you where you are today.
Oh, that's a long, hard question, I guess. Where did it get me to where I am today? Loving family, mum and dad. My father was a builder and decorator. They were born just before the Second World War. Dad was probably 8 when they, no, was he? No, it would have been 6 when the first, from the Second World War broke out. And so I've got a lot of values that were instilled into me. My mum was quite late when she had me, probably 1960s standards. She was 30 when I came along in 1968, and then my 18-month younger sister came along afterwards, and we grew up in South London in a normal sort of environment and what have you. But we were very came from a sort of a background of where there was a lot of sense of community still. And I know that's changed a lot in a lot of cities where they've become very sort of fractured in that respect. And but yeah, so I grew up in London in the 1970s when it was overshadowed with sort of terrorist bombings and things like that. And it wasn't the same as sort of living in Belfast or somewhere else where you were living under constant threat. It wasn't a war zone as such. But I think it does sort of shape you in terms of risks that you have. In those days, that the terrorists used to phone up and say that there was a bomb in a particular location, rather than
Right.
now where it's just completely indiscriminate. So,
Right.
but
They used to tell on themselves, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's not detracting away from the people that did lose their lives in terrorist bombings or what have you, and still are. We've had some really bad ones since, but I keep being reminded about the fact that I've been almost 8 months old, I guess, with the first landing of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and what have you on the moon.
Right.
And then the fact that how not just technology, but how we've evolved. Perhaps I speak for sort of some parts of Canada where it gets really, really cold, but we grew up in houses that didn't have central heating, and there's a Billy Connolly sketch that I saw recently where he talks that he grew up in quite a poor out neighborhood, and he talks of having growing up as a kid with piles of clothes. You may measure how cold it was by how many coats you had on top of the bed.
Right.
So to think now where when we have a cold snap and it's still, you just turn the heating up a little bit more. You don't have those creature comforts that you've got now that you just didn't think about when you were kids. You just
Right.
It's cold and you got up.
Yeah.
walk to school in the rain, and my kids go, "Oh, can you not? I said, you only live a mile away. Just walk." We had to walk miles in the rain.
Right. Uphill both ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
But so I don't know in terms of what people might want to understand about my background. I think I had quite a grounded childhood. Went to a local village school, even though we lived in the South London. It was still quite a small school, and even then it was quite multicultural society. So London's grown up as one of those sort of very cosmopolitan cities where I think you do, even from a young age, skin color didn't make any difference. You grew up with different backgrounds, privileged, those that were quite poor. I think you just get used to not discriminating. I never felt that there were, that we did see discrimination, but as a child, you just accepted everyone for who they were and what have you.
Nice.
And perhaps that part of, again, with the values that my parents sort of have given, I've just passed those on to my sons, and in the same way, especially during this period of, we're into our third lockdown in the UK, third national lockdown, and just trying to sort of share some of those thoughts of gratitude with my sons, just to say that there are always someone else worse off than you. At least we've got a roof over our heads and food in our bellies. There are places in the world where it's so hot they don't have refrigerators to keep food cold and fresh. If they don't go out every day to get the food, then they don't eat. And I think that some of those things you just have to remind yourself about how fortunate you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Edward, when you were growing up, I know that you have a sailing background. I know that water is someplace that is important to you. Yeah. And growing up in the UK, you're surrounded by water. And so tell us a little bit about how you began your sailing.
I went to a school called the London Nautical School. So instead of going to like a normal secondary school, I started off at what was effectively a naval college. And so my first experiences, I guess, were what we call pulling gigs, which are big, if you can think of a big old-fashioned lifeboat with oars. And we used to row these around the docks. And some of the docks in London now, they were working docks then. So that, you had ships unloading and all the rest of it. It was now they're just upmarket, penthouse suites and all the rest of it in that part of London. And I guess that was my earliest sort of inclination for a tie to the sea. So I wanted to go in the Navy, and that was the progression for this school was to encourage youngsters to go into the Navy. And several of my friends did. I chose not to. We moved out of London to the south coast of the UK, which obviously brought me much closer to water. And it was really then that I was able to then go sailing every day, which ultimately led to my demise educational wise. When I skipped 2 years, I continued my high school education in those terms. And then at age 16, I wanted to do electronics, physics and computer science. And I was told by what is known as a sixth form college. So when you're 17, 18, you go to do advanced level secondary education before you then go on to university. And I just turned around and said, I'm sorry, I don't see, he said, the dean of the college said, those are only half subjects. you need to take economics. And I said, well, sorry, apart from the fact that it's both electronics and economics start with an E, I don't see any relevance. And fortunately, I discovered there was a what is now a university. It was an institute for higher education at that time in the city of Southampton, which was the closest city to us, that was offering those that had failed their exams or didn't quite get the grades they wanted to take an entrance exam to then go into the university. And that's what I did. I managed to skip 2 years of education and went in at 16 and studied electronics and marine electronics, funnily enough. And the view then was, okay, well, perhaps that's still my route going into the Navy. And I was then racing dinghies, and I'd started offshore racing as well. I discovered this kind of weird sport of offshore racing, which with terms like hot bunking. And I said, sorry, what's hot bunking? And they said, well, there's normally, you know, if you've got a 30 or 40 foot boat, there's normally only enough bunks for half the crew to sleep. So when we do a watch system of 4 hours on, 4 hours off, 2 out, and then you do a dog watch so that you can alternate. So you're not doing the same hours on a long distance race. And so at the end of your watch, the guys that get out of their bunk, you get into their bunk, so it's hot. So that's why it's called hot bunking. And so it was quite a weird sort of introduction to my offshore racing. But yeah, so in terms of the sailing, I've done quite a lot since then. Too many fastnet races that I can't recall, which is a race that leads from the 605 nautical mile race that races from a place called Cowes on the Isle of Wight. It's quite a big yachting centre for the UK. You race non-stop all the way down and across the Irish Sea to a little rock with a lighthouse stuck on the end of it, just off the would it be the southeast coast of Ireland. And then you race around that, and you race all the way back to a place called Plymouth. And so yeah, so I've done sort of all sorts of things in boats that floated, some that didn't. And I think it was my penultimate year. I was about to start my penultimate year of a 4-year course, and the Southampton Institute of Higher Education, which is now Solent University. And I got asked to leave by my head of faculty. And I was one of those people, I was getting the grades, but I wasn't seen to be studying properly because I'd fall asleep in, I think the dean of the faculty took umbrage to his very boring lectures on coding, which were after lunch on a Friday, which by that point you either given up the will to live by the end of the week, or you've been in the student union bar and you fell asleep because you're half cut or something else. But for me, it was because I'd been racing every night that week, and then Friday night we'd start our racing. So I'd leave early and we'd be on the boat for about 4 o'clock to start an offshore race that would leave Friday night, race all night. You'd arrive somewhere off the coast. Sometimes we actually arrived somewhere in a little port in France, and Ray was going to have breakfast somewhere, or we'd go within sniffing distance of France and we'd turn around and come back again. Either way, I'd have no sleep for most of the weekend, and then sometimes if it was a long race to say somewhere like La Rochelle or Saint Malo, then I wouldn't be back until early hours of the Monday morning, and then would go into college. So so with hindsight, they probably made the right decision.
And so was it in college that you had, I know you had an incident with a whale?
Yeah, that was a little bit later. That was in '93. I'd already started my own business by that point, And I got a South African friend, and his parents still lived in South Africa, in Cape Town. And we were racing his father's 40-foot boat. And unfortunately, during that period, that was just before the fall of apartheid. And so anything that was imported was classed as a luxury item, especially anything electronics or yachting related. So we turned up with all our safety harnesses, used to doing, sort of certain level of having safety equipment on board, and then only to turn up to this boat that was falling apart. The ropes were all frayed. There was nowhere to clip our harnesses on, and it was one of the offshore races that we did down into the Southern Ocean, and it was, I don't know if anyone's ever experienced, been in the Southern Hemisphere. Certainly, when you've got no light pollution, you cannot get a pin between the stars. It is such an amazing experience. And
Wow.
if you picture sort of this backdrop of a sort of midnight blue sky with littered with stars, and the ocean just black, just completely black, because all you've got is moonlight, and we're surfing off these waves with a spinnaker up. So those are not yachting. So the spinnaker is that big coloured sail that goes at the front, and you're running before the wind, and we're surfing off these waves. And earlier in the day, we'd broken the guardrail. I told you this boat was not particularly well maintained, and the guardrail is a wire that goes between each of the stanchions it's just to stop you falling overboard, basically. Mm-hmm. And so bear in mind, I've got my safety harnesses, got nothing to clip onto. And so I'm working on, and I'm trying to tie up with a piece of string to repair this wire that had broken on this guardrail. And while I'm doing this, I've got both hands, so any sort of motion this way, it's only gravity that's really holding me to the deck. And all of a sudden, with this bang, and I was like, and I'm thrust through the guardrail, and I'm just about to disappear over the side. And my friends grabbed my ankle, fortunately my boot stayed on, grabbed my ankle. Wow. And but it was one of those things, I was like, oh my God, because quite often you get containers that get washed off ships, and they just float just below the surface. And or there's a little bit of air in there, they're just about buoyant. But it wasn't, if we'd hit something like that, that would have been quite it was just hold the yacht, and we were sunk straight away. What we'd actually done was, one of the South African guys rushed up and went, oh my God, we just hit a whale. And what happens is they sleep on the surface, and fortunately we just glanced off the side of it, so we surfed off a wave. If we'd hit it straight on, it would have just stunk us. And I think if we'd have been going any slower, when they wake up, that's when all the damage is done. Their tail comes up. So I'm hoping, when all I saw when I looked over the stern of the yacht was this shadow, or this silhouette on top of the waves of this huge, great big whale. So I like to think that we only gave him a little bit of a headache, and we didn't do any real damage. But yeah, that was certainly an experience.
Oh, I bet, hey?
Wow. No
Let's
kidding.
go back for a minute because we skipped ahead a bit, to when you were 23. So you were 23 and you started some businesses.
Yes. So I'd already said that I'd already skipped a couple of years. Yeah. So I got kicked out early. Fortunately, I landed myself a job through word of mouth recommendation, really, with a company called Motorola. It was a little company at the time. For those that don't remember them, that are a bit on the younger side, that they had their mobile phones were those big brick-shaped, things that with a stubby aerial on them. My boss had one of those. I got the transportable car kit, which was literally a car battery, 12 volt car battery with all the electronics mounted on top, and a hand set. That was my mobile phone. And but I worked in the data comms division, and then after a few years of working for them, actually, that was my first trip to Canada.
Oh.
First ever trip to Canada was I did an audit of one of the manufacturing facilities in Brampton, Ontario, and that was in -40, wearing a summer suit.
Lucky.
Just before my 21st birthday, that was. And so I got an awful lot of experience in a very short period of time, working for, you know, a big major multinational. And I just felt that I'd already got headhunted to work for another company for a very short period. And within 6 months of working there, I realized that this wasn't for me, and I'd already started to plan my exit. So age 23, I started my own consultancy practice. But I was so, this was 1992, but during that period, you know, management consultants were a bad word. So I didn't really want to be called a consultant. So for about 6 or 7 years, I just didn't even call myself a consultant. But I set up this consultancy practice, helping companies take mainly telecoms, but IT, later on it was IT as well, IT and telecoms related technology products, from idea through R&D, through all the testing. You know, telecoms and IT was very regulated in those days. So you'd have to meet various regulatory standards and what have you, right the way through to first customer launch, first customer shipment. And that was me. I started that off age 23. But it wasn't until probably a couple of years ago or 18 months ago that I realized that my first, every project that I got or I was being hired was because of my intuition. And I didn't realize it was that. My first major project that I got, or first major client, was Racal Datacom, who one of their spin-offs was Vodafone. And I was hired because one of the senior technology officer said, you know, if anyone can smell a rat that's not going right in an industry meeting, it'll be Edward. And I hadn't realized that that was my intuition playing out, but it's taken me years to realize that that my superpower, which is my intuition, has been there all along, and I just wasn't really aware of it.
That's
And
awesome.
and that's part of doing business. You know, I set up several businesses along the way, and multiples in parallel. And I can probably say for every business decision that I didn't follow my gut, because that's what we recognize widely as gut instinct, is your intuition, is you know, those decisions didn't go well. You know, if I went against my intuition, they didn't go well. But yeah, so I grew that. I ended up doing, I've launched, I lost count of 4,500 innovative products and services that I've launched, and I've done that in about 80 countries. So I've
Wow.
80
traveled a lot.
countries, 80.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so I've
That's fast.
spent a lot of my professional life, adult life, traveling. I was hoping last year, I was hoping to make that 82. There was 2 new countries that I hadn't worked in. I've traveled to a lot more, but there was 2 others that I hadn't worked in. And unfortunately, with COVID and all the rest of it, they shut their borders to anyone that was coming from the US or the UK. So that stopped that. Hopefully when the borders open again, we can resume traveling.
Absolutely. And so from having these companies that you created, you had other ones on the side that you were working on as well. And you created a virtual company?
Yeah, so I'd also set up so I tried to create a set of businesses that were diverse in the respect that I didn't have all my eggs in one basket. So I had a serviced office business, and then from that we spawned a video conference bureau service. So before we had Zoom and what have you, you'd have professional video conferencing facilities. So if you wanted an interview or something like that, you would go and not everybody that would be able to invest, because we're talking tens of thousands of pounds in those days for this sort of professional end equipment. But I was quite fortunate in the respect that the market leader was a startup when they became a client of mine, and I got paid for one job. I got paid in the system for a piece of equipment, and so that sort of started that other little franchise, that other little business. But the virtual side of it really came because we were doing a lot of work, a lot of projects in emerging markets, so when the Asian money or financial crisis hit in the late 90s, so pre-dot-com bubble, that rippled all the way through, and it pretty much wiped out the fledgling Russian stock exchange. But the money that was tied up was minuscule, really. But it sent a bit of a wave through, and people that were perhaps new to those markets got put off, and it just hit a bad time. So I went from hiring to having to lay people off, and I just created a virtual team then from then on, from '98. And yeah, so that's probably the earliest virtual team that I can think of in terms of from a business model. And that stood me true until my brain injury, which in 2001.
Yeah. So tell us about that. Walk us through what that was like, and the emotions that went with all of that.
Again, sailing was the culprit.
Yes.
I was racing a friend's yacht and got hit on the forehead just here. Probably can't tell in this light, but occasionally when I'm tired, the muscles are a bit loose, and you can just see a little indentation. And excuse me, what was it? It wasn't that windy. It was a 4.7, so it's 30 plus knots of wind. On a little 30-foot boat, that's enough. And we were short-handed, and my goddaughter was on the foredeck. So I decided that it was too rough for her, so I would go forwards, which meant there was one less person in the cockpit. And we were just tacking, maneuvering the boat, and one of the sail got caught. But by the time it got free, the whole weight of it, plus the stainless steel ring, the sort of thickness of my thumb, was attached to the end of the sail, went out and hit me at about 30 miles an hour. And didn't knock me out, but I didn't even know it was a brain injury at that point. Because the adrenaline was still pumping, and that was probably about 9 o'clock in the morning, and we finished the race at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening.
Wow.
And but looking back now, there was obvious telltale signs. If anyone's ever worn sunglasses, or both of you wearing glasses, you get water droplets on your glasses, and that's just like that's how my vision was for the rest of the day. I couldn't focus beyond the mast. If I was, I even took the helm at one point, but I was doing it all by feel. I couldn't see anything very well, and that was primarily because we were leading our class in the race at that point, and just my I guess the neurologist put it down to my competitiveness, and he'd also used to treating sort of service people, veterans that had explosions, and he said all I can liken it to, your brain was held in this state where you were just waiting for the next flashbang to go off. But it was quite, not scary. I wouldn't use the word scary, because the effects of it sort of evolved over the following week. So I didn't go to, I said I don't want to go to hospital, because I didn't want to spend the next 4 hours hanging around in accident and emergency. My two eldest sons were 4 and 2, I think they were at that time. And, you know, it's all that upheaval of the whole family having to sit in, you know, at the ER room somewhere. So I said, look, I'll be fine. And it was the next morning when I felt like someone was holding my ankles up, and I was being held almost upside down in the bed, being swung round. And I literally woke up grabbing hold of the sheets going, oh, stop, I want to get off. I think that was that point I said, I think I need to go to see someone.
Yeah.
So I think that was sort of the realization. But I was misdiagnosed initially, went to the first hospital. We got a local hospital, but it's nurse-led. So it means there's no doctors there, certainly not at the weekends. And initially they thought I had a detached retina because of the sensitivity to the light. So I went with this referral letter up to the main city. You know, there's a Southampton city, which is about 20 miles away, to their large general hospital. And again, I was seen by a doctor that in the accident department that disappeared for about 10 minutes after he'd looked at my head, because there was, as you know, as you can see, there was no cuts, there was no blood anywhere. All the impact had gone inwards.
Yes.
And I think it was only after about 10 minutes, one of the nurses, the sisters, came in and said, "Oh, you know, I've got are you okay?" I went, "No, I've got a referral letter." And that's only then that they went, and this doctor came back with some painkillers and was going to send me away. And then I was even misdiagnosed when I went, because they got an ophthalmic A&E department. I was misdiagnosed then as well. But I'm trying to describe some of the things that, so I was suffering with vertigo. My speech was slurred and laboured, primarily because I just couldn't remember the words to say. And I think it was after about, because I was being treated with concussion, by my own GP. And I think it was after about a week, I'd gone back into my own doctor's surgery. It was when I stood up to walk across the waiting room, and I stumbled. That my GP then said, "Right, let's see, you're not leaving. I'm going to get you a CT scan." Unbeknownst to me, at that particular point, it wouldn't have identified any bleeding or anything on the brain. So I didn't have an MRI like I should have done. And it took, because they thought they were dealing with concussion, because I'd had another knock on the head previous to that sailing, that they put it down to concussion. And it was 4 months before I got a referral to a neurologist.
Wow. And so did you have, was there much for memory loss? Was that a key sign or a key effect that the brain injury had for you?
Yeah. How can I put it? So it wasn't just the fact that, so I was struggling with words, and my speech was laboured and slurred because I couldn't think of the right words to say. I couldn't articulate anything. That was part of it. That was obviously because outwardly, and that was, I think, the hard thing for my wife was, outwardly I didn't look like there was anything wrong with me.
Right.
And so it was only really the physical things like the slurring of the words and everything else that I couldn't hold a thought in my head going from one room to the next. You know,
I'm like that now. No.
Yeah, me too.
You know, sometimes you go and you go, "Why did I come into this room?" Oh, and you retrace your steps. I couldn't even do that. It was, so one of the other sort of physical side of it, I had hypersensitivity. So from the impact, I had hypersensitive taste and smell and hearing, which some people said, "Oh, that must have been really great." You know, I'm like, no, you almost have these filters that are put in place. You know, so you taste everything, and it doesn't always taste nice. And the same with smell. I could smell, you know, if clothes had perhaps not been taken off the washing line too soon and they were a little bit damp, but you couldn't smell that they were damp. But it wasn't, you know, I could smell, and it wouldn't be until I'd been wearing them for a bit that other people go, "Oh yeah, you are. They does smell a bit musty." And it was like, so all those senses were very heightened, and especially with the hearing, having incredibly intense headaches from the impact, which I later discovered after a cranial manipulation was actually a structural thing. That the pressure and the headaches were part of because my skull was off centre.
And
in fact, my occiput had dropped an inch at the back, and my right ear had dropped an inch, and I couldn't work out why my sunglasses wouldn't fit.
Wow. And you have
That's
two little
crazy.
boys at this point
At that
in your
point,
life.
yeah, so they were
You're having
screaming.
these massive headaches and all of this going on.
Yeah.
And sensitive ears to boot.
Yeah, well, so I've been left with hypersensitive hearing. So even now, I've got hypersensitive hearing.
Wow.
But so we just...
And so...
Go on, sorry, Cindy.
Oh, sorry, Edward. Oh, I was just going to say, can you tell us how, like, what steps did you take to move past that? And, like, what did it look like moving forward from that?
I think the biggest thing, the initial thing was, so I would also have this fog, what I would describe as a fog descending down, and I'd feel completely detached from everything. So I do recall going to my cousin's wife's funeral during this period, and I'd be there in amongst the family, and then it was almost as though I was stood 10 feet back, looking in on the group. It was really bizarre sort of detachment in that respect. And it was also, you know, after a period of going through the neurologist, so I wasn't just memory loss, it was the fact that I couldn't read, I couldn't articulate all the things that I was having. And so how do I move past that? I was reliant on the medical staff, you know, neurologists and the counsellors, referred to a counsellor for, you know, then for those that perhaps don't understand, when you do have a brain injury or something of that nature, the natural thing is you get a depression, you become depressed. So I was clinically depressed as well. And, you know, this was they measure it, and it's, you know, it's like a sine wave, you're up and down.
Right.
And I think the first thing was, because of the headaches and everything else, they put me on a low dosage antidepressant as well as vertigo tablets. And I had every side effect that you could think of on the list. You know, I'd wake up wringing wet. You know, I was like, oh. So the idea is that with the low dosage, sort of these old school antidepressants, is that supposedly it would stop the analgesic effect that you had from perhaps taking too many painkillers. Mm-hmm. And I've never been one for taking painkillers or tablets. My mum was into reflexology, so I would always use pressure points for headaches and things. And I think it was about around the time that I was being referred to the neurologist, or was just getting the first appointments, that because of this ear thing, my right ear had dropped, that I went to my sister's friend, who was an osteopath, and she was, you know, was able to manipulate my occiput, so the base of the skull, which had dropped. Wow. And it was, I can only describe it as evangelical. I was like walking out of the fog into brilliant sunshine after she'd manipulated my skull and vertebrae. So the vertebrae were slightly twisted, or, you know, it's just off skew from the impact, and that was what was causing all the vertigo, the physical aspects of that sickness, and when you feel sick with vertigo. But that actually unmasked the I think it's the you know, where the brain can only deal with so much pain at once. So, you know, once you heal one thing, you become aware of something else. It was only after all those physical aspects, you know, I hadn't got the intense headaches anymore, that then the cognitive issues of the slurred speech was related, because I couldn't think of the right words. And yeah, so I mean, so how do I put it? The biggest problem I had was actually articulating the problems I was having, because frontal lobe, they think, right, okay, that's, your executive functioning, decision making, but the hypersensitive hearing didn't factor into that because that part of the brain's somewhere else. The loss of memories and things like that. So part of the path, I guess, was I learnt to read again. So I took the leaflets that the nurses and the neurology department handed out, primarily to loved ones, for them to say, okay, well, this is the part of the brain that's been affected, and this is how the patient is impacted. And I took those, and I just spent months reading them, learning to read them. I could read I could recognize individual words, put them in a sentence didn't make any sense to me. And it would, so just even a one side of paper, one page, would take me several hours to read, and I was just mentally exhausted from the exercise. And over a period of time, I realized I was starting to understand it. I could then articulate, because once I could then, I was being able to retain it, I could then make sense of it and articulate, okay, well, this is how it's affecting me. And I could use the words that they would understand back to them, as it were. But I guess it was about a year, maybe 14 months after the initial injury, that I was expressing this just sheer frustration of knowing, I was running several companies, working at quite high level. I was advising, prior to the head injury, I was advising, I'd advised foreign governments, I'd worked for the European Commission, big blue chip, multinationals, as well as some smaller startups. And there I was, unable to do anything, wandering from one room to the next. To the point that the first time I opened my laptop, and it wasn't just the fact that it was asking me for a password, and I was going, if you'd have thought about it as being just, oh, I've forgotten the password, it was actually, oh my God, it's asking me for a password. It wasn't just that I couldn't remember the password, it was actually that it was a realization that it's asking me for a password.
Right.
I still haven't, I've never recalled that password, so I ended up wiping the machine. But the biggest problem was I used to, and I still do now, I've learned how to do it, but for every login that I had on every system, and every server, I'd have a different unique password that I'd cast to memory and never written down, and they'd be 18 characters, complicated, sort of uppercase, lowercase, squiggles and what have you. So that became a real problem when I couldn't remember anything, and that part of it was wiped. But it was going back to the moment that I was sat explaining how frustrated I was, and then being told, look, you're going through this period of bereavement for the loss of, for the loss of function, for loss of your capabilities, for your memories, for everything else. You're not going to be that internet. You're not going to be running an international consultancy practice anymore. And at the time, I'd had to go back to work because I was literally just financially flattened, and I'd taken a small project. A small gig with a small company. Well, relatively small. They're about 10 million turnover, but in terms of the businesses I dealt with, it was quite small. But it was the mindset, very negative, blame culture. And the only way I could cope going into that environment every day was I would imagine this imaginary force field of positivity, and it would become depleted by the end of the day. And that was my only way of surviving the day in that environment. And I think I was explaining part of that frustration to the neurologist and the counsellor. And then, to be told and have fed back to me, well, that's it. You've reached a plateau. You're not going to get any better. And it was like a punch in the stomach. But again, this is where that intuition came in, that something deep inside me said, probably a few swear words, which I won't repeat, but I may have even said them out loud, I don't recall. But I was not happy, and I came away from that thinking, no, this can't be it. This can't be right. And had during that period, I'd had people say, oh, you know, I've had people that have, you know, had their spinal columns damaged and they've rebuilt them and they've been able to walk again, but there wasn't any social reference for me of anyone that had a brain injury like mine and recovered, not fully. You know, they might have regained some use or function. And so that really was the realization coming away from that meeting and going, hang on a minute. In the last 4 months, I've learned to read again. Not if I only learned to read again, I can remember the stuff. So saying that my memories, that, you know, I'm creating new memories and I'm able to remember them and I'm able to articulate it. I mean, one of the biggest things for me was when I first started going back to work, I'd gone back 20 years doing stuff that was, you know, old hat for me, but I was doing it from, whereas I'd be able to quote the engineers, okay, you need to do it this way because of X, Y, Z. I couldn't find the X, Y, Z. And I found myself bluffing, and I'd have to go away and read, you know, 500-page documents to try and work out, well, you know, this is after you know, having this realization of having to learn to read again. I then started to sort of having to read stuff that I knew instantly, to try and back up why I was giving directions to these engineers, or why something was done in a certain way. But it was all done on gut instinct because it didn't feel right.
Wow.
So you just knew intuitively that you were doing the right thing, and it was stuff that you would have known previous, but you would have known how to explain it and known the why behind it previously. But now it was just your gut saying, this is the right thing to do, even though I can't explain it. I just know this is what I need to do.
And if you've ever met an engineer, or if you've ever had an argument with one, you'll realize that they love arguments. They love to have a debate about why you should do something in particular way. And I couldn't. I felt, that's why I felt almost a fraud at that particular point in time. I felt, you know, I got these positions, I got these jobs afterwards based upon the me before the pre brain injury. You know, I was a go-to person in the industry on various subjects, and certainly on certain countries' markets and everything else. And I felt myself, and so that, I guess that played heavily on that whole clinical depression thing. And that was the other thing. I didn't want. There was only a very few people that really knew me well that knew I'd had this brain injury, and I didn't want to. Certainly, you know, going into that negative environment was where it's a blame culture. For them to know that I'd had a brain injury and I'd lost memory and everything else, for them to then use that. I've been in corporate environments enough to know that the games that people play, to say, no, we told you that. You've obviously forgotten that's your brain injury. You know, I just didn't even want to go there. And
so how did you work through that?
So after realizing, coming out of that meeting, that hang on, this doesn't add up. You know, I've learned to read again in the last 4 months, and I'm creating new memories. My only other reference was a long list of things, about 10 things that my neurologist had said not to do. Don't stress myself, don't overtax myself, don't, you know, basically be easy on your brain, don't. And I didn't know, I didn't have any other reference to go from. So I just started doing all the things he told me not to do. There's a theme there. Do you realise there's a pickup? There's a little bit of a theme of me doing things I'm not supposed to do. I've been told.
There is a theme, yes.
So thank God for that, really.
Yes, truly.
And I think it was at that point, it was because I had obviously having to read up on the brain and understand it more. I now have a natural interest in trying to understand how the brain works, what we think we know about the brain, because that's the other thing, what we think we know about the brain. And part of it, so one of the things was the neurologist had said, do you practice mindfulness? I said, what's mindfulness? He said, well, that's where you sit quietly. And I said, you obviously don't know me very well. Prior to the brain injury, I'd had 3 thought processes all running at the same time. And actually, I discovered, well, I didn't discover it, but I found for myself a technique of getting myself to sleep just by concentrating on my own breathing. And I didn't realize it at the time. That's a basic form of meditation. Didn't realize it. I just did it intuitively as a way to get to sleep. And as I said prior to us going live, I'm normally awake. I'm a night owl, so I'm normally awake at this hour anyway. And even now, even if I do fall asleep, it's 2 and 3 in the morning. I'll wake up anyway. And where was I going? I was explaining about rediscovering meditation. So probably of all the other things that I could list, and I wrote them in a book in 2016 as my way of helping anyone else that might have had a brain injury. They wanted to know that there was light at the other end of the tunnel. Don't believe everything that the neurologists say to you. I'll caveat it. There are brain injuries and there are brain injuries, but my particular brain injury, and I've helped people with stroke as well, but I think it's that moment that you're told you're not going to recover. You either believe them. It's like when people are told, I'm sorry, you've got cancer, you've only got 6 months to live, and they die within days of the physician telling them when they get, how long they've got. So I'm very mindful of being careful what you tell yourself and what you allow others to tell you and feed your brain. And but the meditation was probably one of the biggest things looking back that really aided my recovery. And it started off really strange because my brain started lots of illnesses after the brain injury, which I would now term as, because my brain was at disease. It wasn't diseased, but it was, it wasn't at ease. I had I was passing out with immense pains in my abdomen, and so I would use the breathing techniques to channel the pain, to try and ease the pain. And I'd had endoscopy, colonoscopy, they couldn't find anything, and it was just, so as far as I was concerned, these were manifestations. I had a pneumonia after, consider I was a very healthy person before that, but because of the brain injury, everything was out of whack, as it were. And so even now, I don't sit down and even at the start of when all this COVID thing happened, I could feel my bronchial tubes getting heavy, and I was like, I know, I've been there, done that, and I just said, right, I'm not sitting there in bed. And I got up and I just went out into the sunshine, spent as much time as I could, and I just mentally told myself, that's it. I'm not doing whatever's going on here. I'm not doing, and I recovered within a couple of days. I'm not saying I'm a miracle in that respect, but I'm very, very conscious of if you couple desire with belief and action, how much you can achieve. The brain is an amazing organ, and you just don't know. There's vast elements of it are untapped. Who's to say that that other 90% of the brain that we don't use is just because we haven't activated it in another frequency?
Absolutely. The whole, speaking about beliefs and desires, and being able to do more and move forward. I'm not sure if we're ready to move on to this, but it kind of links into you becoming the executive producer for the Dreamer movie. I mean, you healed yourself through your beliefs and desires.
Yeah.
And I know you're helping others along the way. You're helping so many people along the way. And this Dreamer movie is one of the ways that you're helping people. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm conscious of time. I don't know how much time we've got left, but the
It's okay if we go over.
okay, that's fine. So there was a little bit of a backstory to that, because I didn't just come and create or become part of the team that created Dreamer. It started with a meditation, believe it or not, back in 2015, and then that set a ball in motion. I ended up co-authoring a book with Brian Tracy, and then off the back of that was asked. They were just making his life story. They were wanting people that had been involved with him over his long span of his career, to help in making his life story. And I thought, and I turned that, actually, funny enough, I turned the book down first time. I turned it down. And then I turned down the movie with Brian Tracy down the first time, primarily because son number 3 was due in the August, and the other sons were, 2 weeks and 4 weeks early. So my wife said, "You're not," and the most of the filming was end of July, beginning of August, and ironically, actually, I got the phone call transiting from San Diego through New York that I'm in labour. So he was early, but I made it back in time. But that was the journey that started, because part of my recovery was identifying who I was, and realizing that I'd been helping all these companies make lots of money, and it wasn't incongruent with who I was. And so Dreamer really is just one of those strategies that I am using, and I will continue to use, to try and help people to create a better world. So my vision that I came up with was to transform 3 billion lives, one mind at a time. And my initial thought was, how am I going to use all my how can I use my skills and my knowledge to have a bigger impact, to create a legacy within the world? And initially I thought that was by helping crazy innovative ideas, like creating energy from refuse, and creating zero waste processes that would sort of have major impact on whole economies. But I realized as my path progressed that in order to do that, we need to create more dreamers. We need to reach out to a much younger generation as well, because so during this period, I've also been acting as a mentor, professional mentor to a number of graduates, undergraduates, and I discovered that their life expectations and what they want to do, they want to have an impact, but they're perhaps guided or not guided in the right path right from the start. And part of it was thinking, well, we need to sort of inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators and world changers much before those dreams get squashed out of them. So as kids, I grew up, I think my first invention was at age 5. I was going to build a submarine in the garden, and until my mum just sort of very helpfully pointed out that the wood you're using has got little holes in, and so sort of, unwittingly squashed that dream. I might, in the innovation process, I might have chosen a different material, but at age 5, that squashed it. That was it. I'm not going to have a submarine anymore. So the concept for Dreamer, at least for my getting involved with it, so the original concept was a guy called Giovanni, who is founder of Archangel Academy, and Nick Nanton, who I'd worked with previously with on the making of Brian Tracy's life story. And so when this project came up, and he said, "Look, I know your dream. We want to create a movement. We want just not create another film. We want to create a movement. We want to share the stories of, 6 unique stories of people that have, held up tight to those dreams and actually gone on to make a big difference in the world. And impacted hundreds of thousands and millions of people." And some of the people. So you can actually see over my right shoulder there. This is actually a clip from the screenshot from the film.
Nice.
We were filming it at this guy called Dean Kamen, who is a billionaire American inventor. This was at his estate in Manchester, New Hampshire, and he's best known for building the Segway or for inventing the Segway, but he's got 450 patents were all more akin to medical advancements and things like that. So part of he spent 30 years creating an organization called FIRST, which teaches high school kids to they're using robotics, but they have to build robots, and then they have robot fights around the world, and high school to high school. But the whole idea of it is for them to have to collaborate. So it's not just them building these robots, fighting. It's actually teaching them different skills, different life skills about collaborating with those that. So the way that they create the competitions, as it were, really inspires and engages the kids. And so we've got other people that are in the film. So Lisa Nichols, that many, I think, those that may have watched the trailer beforehand, Lisa Nichols is there. She was in the Secret. In fact, ironically, we took so much footage that that Nick created another documentary off the cutting room floor for Lisa Nichols, and that won an Emmy in December at the same time that the film got in it. And we've got 3 Emmys for Dream, which was one for the film, one for the trailer, and the editor picked out Nick Ruff actually picked up he's an amazing editor, considering that we were still filming when COVID came and sort of played its part in the world in disrupting everything. He managed to still create an multiple Emmy winning film out of the footage that we'd already taken, and some of the golden nuggets that were shared by the various individuals.
That's fantastic. Congratulations for those awards. That's amazing.
Well,
it is amazing.
Really down to the team. I did my bit, but it's a team effort. And it's just, for me, it's just recognition. So that the awards for me are more about elevating the importance of the film.
Yes.
To get the message out. Some people, when they were watching, so we did a global premiere in July, to coincide, believe it or not, with the moon landing, first moon landing. And people said, "Oh, did you create this film specifically for to be released in the middle of the pandemic?" And we went, "No, but we brought it forward a few months. It was supposed to be released at the Toronto Film Festival in September, and it was just decided that we've almost got to give permission for everyone to dream, because I think with so many people during 2020 around the world that we're effectively we're in a state of fear. They're in a position where they're not able to go out and get food. They don't know where the next thing is coming from. You're in that survival mode. You're not in a creative place. Excuse me. And so therefore you're not going to, when you're in that survival mindset, you're not creating anything, you're not thinking, you're not dreaming, you're not thinking of what might be able to, all those plans that people had for 2020, 2020 vision, or gone.
Mm-hmm.
Your governments are locking you down. You're being restricted. Especially when it first came out, we just didn't know what kind of world-changing virus this would be.
Right.
And touch wood, I think we've got off lightly. It could have been something was contagious, Ebola or something like that would have wiped out millions and millions of people, or it could have been something like the Spanish flu that would have impacted hundreds of millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
But the point was, and the point still is with the film, is giving reference to people to say, look, give them permission to dream, to dream of a better world, but not just to dream of a better world, but to actually do something about it.
Yeah.
And there's a big thing about stepping up. And this world, I think, if anything, 2020 has taught us, with cars not driving around for a few weeks, the pollution, the skies were clear, wildlife was coming back to places where it wasn't before, dolphins in what was a very polluted Venice, Italy, waterways.
Yeah.
That, it doesn't take much for nature to recover, given a bit of a chance.
So true.
But it's our opportunity to create a better world, but it's down to us to do it. The new leaders of the world, and that's every single one of us, to create this new world that's better for everybody and the planet and everything else. And that's why I created, the headline for the podcast was 7 dimensions, and that's why I was, in the last 6 months, I've created this model. I wanted to try and model what I've done in business over the last 30 years, from an intuitive perspective, to try and articulate my vision of incorporating purpose, core values, alignment of core values between people, not just within the workplace, but individuals within your communities that you're serving. Not just if you're a business or an organization, not just the people that work within your organization, creating better environments for them, but every touch point of humanity. So your customers, your supply chain, everyone that works within your supply chain, subcontractors, the communities that you serve, planet from an environmental perspective, but in terms of the impact that we have, that relationship that we have. And as part of this model I did, I won't go into too much detail, because I'll save that for a different time, but majority of, so I'm seeing it again in the run-up to 2021, headlines are saying, innovation, we've got to be, as organizations and as countries, we've got to be innovative, and that's what's going to save our, that's what's going to fuel our economic recovery in 2021. Well, the biggest problem is, and from this model, it was quite profound when I was going through the process. I could actually identify all the things that went wrong right the way back from the first industrial revolution, so the other two dimensions are innovation and profit. And profit isn't a bad thing when it's done right, but when you've only got those 2 dimensions of profit and innovation, they will fuel each other. So if you're only going to innovate for productivity or for generating profit, we can see the impact of that right the way back. So introduction of farm machinery on the land, for productivity, so they could harvest and get more out of the soil. The impact that had on the people that were working in the farms. Well, they were able to grow more cotton or process more wool or whatever. So they created machinery that then worked in the mills, so they would create more textiles. So the people that were unemployed on the land moved to the factories and worked in horrible conditions in factories. With health and safety was not even a word then, or a series of words that was even considered by business. And we can see the impact moving forward. And even now, I mean, I'm somebody I'm a scientist. I'm somebody from that spent my entire professional career developing and helping companies bring new innovative products and services to market.
Mm-hmm.
But they're always at the detriment. We don't always see it at the surface level. Mobile phone. Turn out a new version of a mobile phone every few months.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
A new app on the App Store. For what?
Mm-hmm.
What, you know, what for what benefit? To make a few dollars?
Yeah.
I'd rather
Absolutely.
see someone use that skill that they have to produce, you know, a cochlear implant, or for a small child that can hear its mum speak for the first time, or you know, just for people to actually just stop and say, right, okay, what skills have I got, and how can I create a legacy in my own lifetime to have a you know, to better the world. And part of the model was actually looking at the three-dimensional aspect of the energy that's created from the motion of these different dimensions all working. And if they're working independently, then they're not in balance. You know, if we've got just profit and innovation in one aspect, then that's going to have detriment. There's no consideration even for, you know, for humanity or the planet, and what was the purpose. You can loosely say, oh yeah, to make more money, which is a model that's been taught since the late 70s and 80s in every business school. The sole purpose of a business is to make profit. Oh, I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's wrong. And so that's the reason for sort of coming up with this 7th dimension. So if you were counting, you would realize there was only 6 that I mentioned. So to create maximum impact is when you bring them all together and they form. So if you can imagine 3, if you're creative, you might be able to see 3 spheres, 6 spheres all coming together, and where they interlock in the middle, you create a 7th dimension. And that's when you reach maximum impact. You have, not just from a structural perspective, you get the integrity of that sphere of dimensions, but the integrity that you have from leadership to always do the right thing. So, you know, we in the 90s and 2000s, we've had, you know, environmental legislation coming into directing businesses. You know, this is the regulation that you have to follow and everything else. And businesses do it because it's a regulation, not always because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And you know, we saw that early on with messages that were coming out of various administrations, you know, publicly saying that to business, and I saw this in the US. By the way, there was statements from the EPA saying that they wouldn't be able to go out and police any of the compliance to the regulations because of restrictions on movement of their staff and all the rest of it. Well, I'm sorry, that to a business that's a green light to say, okay, let's go ahead and do whatever we want to. We're going to, you know, cut some costs, and it's, you know, trying to bring back into business some of that integrity, some of that integrity within leadership, but on all levels.
Yeah.
I
love that.
So hopefully I've articulated that okay. I'm still creating the animated version of this, the different spheres, so people can understand what I'm trying to simplify.
Well, I'd love to see that when you've got that completed. That would be fantastic. Yes, absolutely.
I've been saying for some time that we're entering a new epoch of business, and we've seen social enterprise, and we've seen you know, different things, different movements to try and create a better world. But unfortunately, you know, a lot of social enterprise, a lot of businesses, like any business going, you know, when they first start up, they fail. They don't have enough cash. They don't have enough revenue. And, you know, profit isn't a bad word. Even if you're a non-profit, if you don't make the profit in the first place, or non-profit, all that means is you spend all the profits.
Right.
So if you don't make profit in the first place, you can't do good, you know, to further the aims of your organization.
Right. Right.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing when you've got that all put together and hearing more about it. You know, you've shared so much information here, and it's been fabulous to chat with you today, Edward. Can you tell our guests or our viewers where they can find you?
Oh, Ed Fitzgerald UK is probably the common one. So you'll find me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook as Ed Fitzgerald UK. And on LinkedIn, I'm just type in my name, Edward Fitzgerald. I'm the only one that's after the URL IN / and then it's just Edward Fitzgerald. And but yeah, I'm also joined your Squirrel network, so you'll be able to find me in there too.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. We're glad you're in there. You know, we touched base not quite a year ago, and I was so happy that you accepted the invite to be on here, because I knew you had a lot of information that we could really benefit from, and I look forward to hearing. Do you have a way of tracking how many people you've touched? Because I know your goal is to touch 3 billion people and to support them in some way. Do you have a way to track that?
I don't think I will ever will. I did think of how am I going to make this tangible? How am I going to prove that I've touched 3 billion people? Part of my vision was, or the realization that I'm not going to do this on my own. And I know that both of you have probably said or spoken to somebody and just, what was a completely innocuous few kind words that you shared that was nothing to you, or you helped somebody, made a huge difference to that individual. And I've had it come back in things that I didn't even think about, something that I might have shared or helped or said to somebody. That wasn't me purposefully going out and finding 3 billion people. And the realization of actually them coming back and saying, you don't know how much that meant to me at that particular time to hear those words from you. And I'm sorry if I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but I'm reminded of Helen Keller's story of the woman that helped her overcome her disability with her schooling from the outset, and she said that I would never have been able to do it if it hadn't been for this one woman.
Anne Sullivan.
Anne Sullivan, yeah. Sorry, her name, yeah. So, and so, in that respect, the 3 billion is kind of come from someone hearing or being inspired by something that I've done or said, or that I've shared, or somebody recounting a story from the movie, and someone else getting inspired, and them going off and taking the action to become. So, it's an aspiration. I did an interview with Jack Canfield, and he said, "Why only 3 billion?" And I said, "Well, I'll take up the challenge of doing more." I said, "I can change the website easily." The initial impact was just to create massive impact. And so a lot of the projects I get involved with, I'm now, rather than settle for small, I'm looking for how best can I spend my time and my resources to have the biggest possible impact for my time. And hopefully that's a philosophy that will stand true and will bear fruit. And hopefully by 2030, we're all living in a much better world that's greener, cleaner, safer environment, and everyone's healthy. That will stand testament. And if I've only played a small part of impacting only a few people to make that happen, then I'll die a happy man.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
don't think you need to have numbers because
Yeah.
the ripple effect is going to just
Yeah.
be amazing, right?
That was
As it
the
Yes,
goes.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know,
Yeah.
we feel incredibly blessed to be a part of that you've
Yes.
taken the time
So much.
today to be here with us. We are
Hmm.
incredibly blessed for that. And we want to thank you so much for joining us here today on TTSN. And with that, we're going to sign off from TTSN. Bless you all. Have a great week. And we'll see you here again next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.